All right. All right, we're recording. Now, earlier in the semester, I shared with you Greek ceramics. And in getting into ancient Greece, discovering Greek ceramics was really a great joy for me. And I hope you enjoyed them too. It's my pleasure to share Greek ceramics with you. I think you've seen in a lot of the other visual material that we've used and some of the explanations that in the case of Greek ceramics are tremendously important because of the images on the ceramics, and that's where we get a huge amount of information. We also have another art form that I discovered along the way, putting together humanities classes, since I'm not an art historian by training, which is nice. It's delightful for me to be able to find out about new things. That's one of the things I like about the humanities class. So today I want to talk about Roman mosaics. In Roman mosaics, there was a mosaic art in Greece and other nearby civilizations, to be sure. It's a very basic thing to do. And I'm going to talk to you about where the art of mosaics went on from the Romans in terms of the Byzantines and Christians. But the Romans had a really just a tremendous practice of mosaics. We think of the Romans again as sort of maybe some, in some sense, coarser than uh, the Greeks, but their art is of high pitch of sophistication, and we will look at that right now as we look at our Roman mosaics. Yeah. Roman mosaics. Let's not be too abrupt. Roman mosaics. Let's go back. Roman mosaics. So there. So as I say, you have these Minoan and Mycenaean civilizations which existed nearby before the Greeks. They're very interesting and mysterious and kind of spooky civilizations. They have some really good archaeological sites and relics. You see them having this practice. It's a Near Eastern practice going back to the beginning of the millennium. And we find it in Greece. The Corinthians will always come up. Remember, the Corinthians were making those ceramic pieces in the shapes of animals. Corinth is a really important ancient Greek city. So then you had the introduction of colors. We find a lot of colors, again, by the end of the 4th century. That's by the end of the Athenian Empire days. And then in Hellenistic times, again, remember you have the great peak of the Greek civilization in the Athenian civilization in the 5th century, then the Peloponnesian War at the end of the 5th century, and a decline, at least in the military and economic influence of Athens. And then you have Alexander riding out of Macedonia at the end of the 4th century, introducing the Hellenic period, leading up, of course, to the rise of Rome a couple of centuries after that. And that's when we start to see the ancient practice of mosaic really taking off. And geometrical floors, again, you'll get used to this watching this, but look at these little, the texture there, of course, these are mosaics. The Medusa is warding off, it's a gargoyle warding off bad luck and bad vibes and bad things. So tessellatum, tasa is a tile in Spanish. That's how I remember it anyway. Opus tessellatum for the normal technique of Greek and Roman mosaic. And so these are just your typical ones, a bit larger than 4 millimeters, which is still pretty small, you know. And then we'll talk about vermiculatum in a minute. The vermiculatum, of course, are the smaller ones. Lots of those were made in workshops. Those mosaics are smaller, and then they would be just brought to the site and all put in, installed at once. And of course, the larger tessellatum is what you're using to fill in larger areas. The Romans, by the way, more than the Greeks, had a, you call it the horror vacue. They had a horror of vacuum. They didn't want any undecorated spot, very typical of them. And so mosaic fit very well with that aesthetic when you wanted some really dense texture where there really wasn't any place where the eye could go where it wasn't going to be stimulated by something or the other. So again, this is very typical. This is all just tesserae but you see that border and then the animal in the middle. We're going to see a lot of these animals. A lot of these are mostly from Pompeii, remember, and Pompeii was buried in an earthquake. And these are sort of holiday homes and villas of wealthy people. And so a lot of these small animals are animals we find on the Nile River, because these Romans would go to Egypt for their vacations and take boat trips on the Nile River. So we see a lot of Nile flora and fauna in these Roman mosaics. And then, of course, a lot of geometrical patterns. Chimera, animals that are mixtures of different kinds of animals. Okay, and again, a sophisticated style. Look at that. That weaving pattern, very common. Vermiculatum, meaning vermicula worm-like, and they called it vermiculatum. They called it a vermiculatum because of the sort of undulating worm-like flow that it had. That is, you get a lot more movement when you're working with just smaller pieces. You got a finer grain detail, so you can render a finer image. And that's what that was for. Emblemata is what I was talking about before. You would typically have a border or else just some other kind of scene, more open scene, and then something dense. It might be a portrait of a person or something of religious significance or something like that in a little centerpiece, the emblemata, and that would be finer worked in vermiculatum, so much smaller tiles, much finer work being done. Okay. As here you can see, and you also notice how fine the art is. It's really, look at that, and those borders, and you can see the effects that they get, kind of three-dimensional effects, and a lot of shading, which I think is interesting when you're thinking about people working with tiles. These Roman mosaic makers have a lot of shading and shadows. That's one of the ways that they show that they're slick, by having the lighting right in the mosaic. Here's some gladiators. Typically when we're not doing, distance teaching, I have a section we do the Romans on the gladiators because it captures a lot about the Romans, I think. Maybe if I can remember, I'll give you a link to, there's some nice National Geographic's documentaries on gladiators. Very distinctly Roman kind of thing. And again, you see these fine kind of flowing lines. Nice duck. And notice there's the shadow of the duck under the duck. And this one you can see the tiles really well. Sorry. Yeah, I mean, look at this. Look at the detail, the attention to detail, the knowledge of different kinds of fish. How many different species of fish, and some of them are identifiable in there. And I'm going to get onto this, why we see these kind of huge sort of aquatic and sort of seafoody mosaics. Again, here's a hippo from the Nile, something you would see on your trip to Egypt. Sectile is something that's familiar to you from being in the lobbies of banks and hotels and airports and things. When you look at the floors in those kinds of places, a high quality floor there will actually be a sectile floor, like a classy bank will have a sectile lobby floor. These are irregular materials that are cut. It's related to making stained glass that way. You're kind of, you have pictures, you have pieces of marble, nacre, which is what you get from oysters, pieces of glass. Of course, then as now, you can use leftover pieces that were used for other things to make your sectiles. And you could, and since you can cut them, then you can get effects that you can't get with the square tiles, but of course it's much bigger. They tend to be clunkier, but there's a real distinct look to the sectiles. Okay. And there you see that kind of thing. Pieces of, say, pieces of glass that are going to be inlaid and stuck onto the surface. Something, again, you can see that standing in line at a bank someplace. You might see a floor just exactly like that. And they have these floors all over the place. And they're sort of taking the sectile form out to something decorative. And this, of course, is a very enduring and lasting form of design, very much with us today, thousands of years later. Soros of Pergamon is the only Roman mosaic artist whose name we know because he was famous. He was copied a lot. So if we want to know about a Roman mosaic maker, Soros is one that we know. Again, he lived, as you see there, in the second half of the 2nd century before the Common Era. So a copy of the Drinking Dove mosaic. And Soros popularized this practice. The birds' images or reflections would be in the water, and he would do that kind of thing in his tiles. There you see just a sort of very easy rendition of the shadow of the pigeon. Now I want to talk about this. You see this floor, and you see there's a rat who's looking at something, and there's like a chicken claw and some other stuff, looks like some seafood things, a crab claw I see. The Romans love to eat. Check out their diet sometimes, Roman recipes, really outrageous. And you would eat sort of semi-lying down. Each person would have their own sort of sofa, and you'd sort of recline on the sofa while you ate. And there would be, for wealthy people, they would have people cleaning up after them, and they have these tile floors, and they would, or stone floors, and they would just drop their remnants of when they were done eating, they would just drop their garbage onto the floor. That's just what they did. And then the servants or whoever was assigned to that job would, I suppose, before everybody else got up, clean off the floor. But that's just how you did it. Rather than bussing the garbage away, everybody just threw all the garbage on the floor, and then it just got cleared off. A common theme for hundreds of years. And you're going to hear these people are having a party, and they're eating roasted chickens, and they're drinking, and they're taking the roasted chickens and the fish and stuff and just throwing stuff on the floor. Because that's what they did. They're classy. That's classy. That's a classy party. Incredible. That's Hadrian's Villa is another great source of both some painting and some mosaics. Hadrian didn't like it much in Rome, and so he had a villa made in the mountains up north of Rome. That also was lost for a long time and subsequently discovered. So other than Pompeii, where just about everything that we're looking at here is Pompeii, Hadrian's Villa. Well, no, everything is in Pompeii. I think you're about to look at it, Pompeii. There you go. There's a mosaic centaur. That's an old thing, huh? Pompeii. Okay, sorry, I got ahead of myself there. Pompeii's near Naples, 1st century BCE, 79 CE, 79 of the Common Era, the 1st century of our era. There, Mount Vesuvius erupted, and erupted very rapidly and violently, and buried Pompeii under many feet of ash so quickly that people were burned and preserved under the ash while eating. What they had set on the table is still there. About 20,000 people. Another amazing thing about Pompeii, though, is that it wasn't until the end of the 16th century, over 1,500 years later, that anybody found it. Anybody even knew it was there. And even then, no one really explored it for about 150 years. It wasn't until almost up to the French Revolution people even knew about Pompeii. So it's another one of those unbelievable archaeological stories, up there with discovering the tombs of Tutankhamun and the other pharaohs, I think. So, yeah. 2nd, 1st century BCE, late Hellenic period, vermiculatum works from Pompeii. Again, these were wealthy people who had villas. This was a holiday town. It was on the slopes of the mountain overlooking the sea, beautiful spot. And people would go out there for their vacations. It must have been nice. And Casa del Fauno, they have these different names. This is Alexander battling Darius. Darius was the Persian emperor, remember, who Alexander overthrew at the end of the 4th century, at which point the Persian Empire basically collapsed and Alexander was its commander. This is a huge one. It's a copy of a work of painting. I'll get to the paintings in a minute. He's got a Medusa on his breastplate, and Bucephalus is Alexander's famous legendary horse. Here it is, what it looks like. Very, again, very, very large. You can see how small the tiles look. And that's Darius on the right with his Persians, and Alexander on the left with his Greek Macedonian force attacking. There he is with Bucephalus, his horse. And you see he's got that Medusa Gorgon on his breastplate. Looks kind of like Nicolas Cage. And here's Darius. He's not going to end up too well at the end of this. He was had that fate to be the over dog who lost. And there you see his people sort of starting to crumble. You can see some very, very fine detail there. Again, all done with mosaics, small inlaid tiles. There's a detail, a little polished up there, showing a sword, some rocks on the ground, and you can see the tiles. Again, very typical mosaic, decorative mosaic in a Pompeii house. Pictures of Nile animals. Another one you would have at the front door was your faithful dog, a little guard dog mosaic at the front door was something that was common. Quite a number of those. That's very charming, I would say. I wouldn't mind having one of those inlaid in the floor by my front door. Also labyrinths, a lot of nice patios. Theseus slaying the Minotaur would be a common detail on a labyrinth or something along those lines. There's what that is. And sectile, an unmistakable look to sectile stuff. And that is also an art form that's very much around today. There's that Medusa warding off bad luck. Quite a lot of those. Look at the eyes, treatment of the hair, just the light on the face. I mean, just a very high level. Here are some people playing music, probably playing music for money. They look like they're maybe street people. Maybe I'm being unfair. Playing their aulos, a nice little pan flute that everybody played. A hearth scene. So you'd have hearth scenes decorating the inside of the house. You would have, again, remember, you wanted all the walls of your house and the floor all decorated, all covered. There's a sectile. That's going to be Dionysius, I would think, the god of revelry, who they always had around for their parties. They understood what parties were for. And frescoes. Now, this is the thing. We don't really associate the Greeks and the Romans with paintings. We think of paintings as kind of early modern things, with Renaissance things. We have frescoes in the Middle Ages, paintings on walls. But the Greeks and the Romans, from our recorded material, from what we know of what they said about themselves, they thought that their painters were really the best artists that they had. So it's quite a lacuna to say that we don't have really any. We do have some painting from Pompeii. We have some painted interiors that have survived because of the eruption of Vesuvius in the year 79 of the Common Era. And so the other point, the last bullet point there, is that you can also very much see in the paintings, just as you can in the statuary, notably, the real tremendous influence on the early moderns, why we call the Renaissance el Renacimiento, the rebirth. Now, another thing is we get these pictures of what these Romans look like. These are upper class Romans at their leisure. people will say, well, are these ancient people white, or are they black, or are they Arabic, or what are they? Well, they're nothing like what we are today. It's 2000 and some years ago. The mix has changed. I mean, white, or are they black, for heaven's sakes? This picture really kind of blows me away. Just look at this woman. First of all, she could have stepped right out of the 1920s as far as the style of her clothing and her hair and everything is concerned. She's smoking. I think she has her gold earrings and her hat on. She's reading a book. Remember, again, this is a picture from a villa in a holiday town frequented by wealthy Roman people. Look at the look on her face. It's come up a few times this semester, this question of how civilized can you be, and are ancient people less civilized than people now? I would say the answer is no. I think we overestimate ourselves. But in any event, whether that's true or not, it looks to me like with Greek and Roman people, some of these people really have attained as much civilization as you can attain. I don't think you can get more sophisticated than that person that we're looking at right there. I mean, she may be limited by the state of technology or scientific knowledge or geographical knowledge or whatever you want. But civilization is about attitude. Civilization is about presence and awareness. And that is a civilized person right there. Here's another fresco. Here you can see, and you'll see this one in the next one. Again, that it's more than just the idea that the ancient Greeks and Romans gave to the Renaissance artists of Europe. It's really very much style as well. Now, this is another thing. You use mirrors in modern homes or offices to make the space look bigger. One thing that people would do in Roman homes was paint windows and alcoves and all kinds of other things like that. So that was a very typical part of their decor, were these sort of phony windows and phony shelves and things. There you can see, look at that reclining figure on the bottom. Not sure. Now look at that. That's a painting on a wall right there. I'm not sure if that last slide was actually wrong. I got to check that. That's a painting on a wall. Again, very realistic kind of doors with a lintel. Just, another aspect of the decor. And again, absolutely, if you want to know where Renaissance painters are coming from, their sensibilities, and even the way that they're posing. The erotic art of Pompeii. And I mean, it's kind of fun. I mean, it's, hey, kids, it's erotic, yay. But also does get at some sociological stuff that I think is interesting to think about. It's hard for us to realize that, I've mentioned a few times the Romans were they're a classist society. They're an imperial society. They have a warrior ethos. They were quite apparently, and we don't just get this from here, but they had their own attitudes towards sex, which were maybe more liberal than the Greeks. I don't know. But in any event, we find a whole lot of erotic art in Pompeii. And again, these are domestic decorations. These are paintings and mosaics and things on walls and ceilings. And household items with sexual themes. I don't know that, let me step out of this for a second for the first time here, because this, I think, is kind of interesting. We saw it a little bit in Greek drama, but in the Romans, it really gets taken to another level. I think look, in our society, broadly speaking, this popular culture that we all live in, we're really saturated with sexual images all the time. And there's pornography all over the place all the time. If anybody wants to look at it. But it's of a certain kind. We have our certain values and the things and things that we, even at the level of the erotic, a society or a civilization has things that they think are right, that they think are the right way to do it. I don't know what I'm trying to say. What I am trying to say, though, is this. The Romans celebrate the phallus. They have phalluses all over the place. I mean, that's it. That's the only thing. I mean, it's like phalluses, and that's the way we are. We don't want to see a lot of phalluses all. We don't want to say. We don't want to see guys' junk all over the place. We just don't. Uh, Maybe I mean, obviously that changes and shifts and morphs from time to time, place to place. Okay, fine. It's cool. I'm just saying that when we look at a lot of Roman art, Roman design, Roman interiors, what we're going to find is a lot of phallic images, and you just have to get used to it. They're just, or you don't, but beware, because when you go to the Romans, you shall see phalli. That last bullet point is a little bit jivey. The erotic work went through all sorts of phases and changes, so that people never really quite knew what to do with it. These pagan, they're people, they're not Christians, of course. So all right, and so yeah, all right. I mean, this is the kind of thing I'm talking about, though. This is like you get this at Home Depot to hang up in your kitchen, right? I mean, sure. But or how about let's go out to Rincon and go to one of those boutiques, and maybe I mean, for the Romans, this was just their idea of decoration. I mean, personally, I'm kind of glad I missed it. Now, I do want to finish here. I want to go over Christian mosaics. If you were living in, we call the period after the fall of Rome, the Byzantine Empire. But if you were a person living during those times, of course, you would have no idea that, whether you were living in the Roman Empire or the Byzantine Empire. I mean, these changes are gradual. People on the ground can't see these changes. As far as they know, they're living in the same civilization, and they are. So those folks took this level, these Byzantine Christian artists, to what I would say is the highest level of mosaics. I mean, we're studying the Romans, so I want you to understand Roman mosaics. But let's just take a look at these Byzantine mosaics, where there's Justinian. Now you start to see that is a very intricate piece indeed. But there's more, because in Ravenna, you see there was consecrated in the middle of the 6th century, the Common Era. There is not one but several churches which are covered in mosaics inside out, floor to ceiling, and they're big churches. So let's just, again, close out by taking a look at them. Again, there's the dome of the basilica. If you looked up, that's what you saw. That's all workers put little tiles in, everything that you see. Every surface in the building is covered in tiles. And so the texture, right, it's not like a flat texture like you get with a painted surface. It's a three-dimensional texture. It's kind of jumping out at you like a peach. Mosaic floor, could have been done hundreds of years before. It looks exactly like a Roman floor. Look up to the ceiling. There's the Lamb of God in tiles in the middle of the ceiling. And this, I think, is the most amazing of them all. You get some sense of the size of it there. Again, there's the dome over the apse of the basilica. You see the density of it. And that is a detail from the larger area underneath the very top. Okay, Chrysostomum. And so we end up with the big guy himself, your friend of mine, JC. And notice again, that's, I like these different colored tiles in the cross. Alrighty then. So one thing that I like to know about is Greek ceramics. Greek ceramics are cool. And also mosaics. And as with ancient ceramics, so with ancient mosaics too. The artist in us ought to appreciate that we could get an awful lot of inspiration, both in terms of their overall vision, but particularly in terms of their technique. You know, being a good artist is really all about mastering a technique. It's about making something that's hard to do look easy. So, I don't know, mosaic. All righty, so that is that, and I shall see you anon. After I go, just got to go upstairs in my mom's pool house out behind.